All right, going to work on rounding decimals. And it's not much different than rounding whole numbers. We just have to make sure we're looking at the right place. So just like with whole numbers, our first step is to, underline the place. What does it say? Underline the place, meaning the place that you are rounding to. So if it says you're rounding to the tenths place, focus on that tenths place. If you're rounding to the nearest hundredth, underline the hundredth. Rounding to the nearest whole number, that you're going to look at the ones place. And I'll do some examples with that. The next step is to look next door. That will give us directions about whether we're rounding up or we're staying the same. / rounding down. So numbers that tell us to stay the same, 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4, just like with rounding whole numbers. If we get 5 or above, like high 5, then we're going up. All right, so again, just like with whole numbers, everything in front of that place will stay the same. And everything afterward either goes away or becomes a 0. That's one difference is that they can go away because 2/10 is equal to 200 thousandths. And I'll show you what I mean if that is confusing. Let's do some examples. So these ones we're going to round to the nearest whole number. So we're trying to say what whole number is this decimal close to. So I know I have a whole 76 with a part. So does that part push it up to 77 or do I stay at 76? Well, if I underline the ones place, my 6, next door I have a 5. What does 5 tell me? Tells me to round up. So my 6 goes up to a 7. Everything in front stays the same. And then I can either write just 77 or I could write 77. Oops. Sorry, not 7. 77 and 0 thousandths. Those two things are equal, so I could write either one. Telling me, okay, that part was past halfway. 503 thousandths is past halfway. 13 and 49 hundredths. Well, 3 is in my ones place. Again, I'm rounding to the nearest whole number. I look next door at my 4. My 4 tells me that I'm going to keep the 3 the same or round the whole number down. So the 3 stays the same. Everything in front stays the same. Everything afterward becomes a 0 or goes away. So I could just write 13 or I could write 13.00 because those two things are equal. So again, 13 and a part, in this case 49 hundredths, is closer to 13 than it is to 14. It's below half, just barely below half, because 50 hundredths would be half, so it's just below that, so we round down. If we're rounding to the nearest tenth, now I underline the tenths place. I look next door. The 2 tells me to stay the same, so I know my 1 is going to stay the same. Everything in front stays the same. Everything afterward can either go away, or I could write 2 zeros. Those two things are equal, but either way, that is what it's closest to 1/10, not 2/10. Nearest tenth. 7 is in my tenths place. 6 is next door. So 7 is going to round up to 8 because 8 tells me to round up. Everything in front is going to stay the same. Everything afterwards can either go away or I can put zeros to make it the same length. Okay, remember this doesn't work with whole numbers. I do have to put the zeros with whole numbers, but with decimals I don't have to. And 4 8/10 is what it's closest to. Now, if I'm rounding to the nearest hundredth, remember my decimal? Tenth hundredths is that second place. So, tenth hundredths is my 5. I look next door at my 9. What does my 9 tell me? To round up. So I round the 5 up to a 6. Everything in front stays the same. I can either end it there, or I could write a 0. Both are equivalent, so they're both correct. Now this next one is a wee bit tricky, because if I look at my hundredths, I got 9. I go next door. 7 tells me to round up. So that 9 is going to round up to a 10, but it's like it gets carried next door. So the 1 actually gets carried over to my 10th place. So I end up with 10, not just 0.010, because that would be smaller. So everything in front stays the same. If it helps, you don't have to write this, but just to write it bigger, what sort of happened, this 9 had to go up to a 10. So it's like it carried over to the next spot. Okay, so it is a 10. It just moved over a place. And then I could also just write 12 and 1/10. I could add on some more zeros. Lots of equivalent ways to write that decimal. All right, now for rounding to the nearest thousandth. Remember decimal, tenths, hundredths, thousandths is that third spot over. So I get tenths, hundredths, thousandths is my 1. What does my 2 tell me? Well, my 2, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 tell me to stay the same. So the 1 is going to stay the same. 8, 4, 3, and 481 thousandths. I could leave it like that. I could add the 0. Generally, we don't write the zeros, but not a problem if you do. All right, 5 is in my thousandths. Looks next door at my 1. My 1 tells me stay the same. So 5 stays the same. Everything in front stays the same. Oh, 25 and 25 hundredths. Didn't even realize I did, or thousandths. Or I could put a 0 afterward. Notice how in this case, this number was bigger than this number, I still stayed the same. This number was smaller than this number, I stayed the same. Whether they're bigger or smaller than one another doesn't matter. It just matters if it's 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4, or 2. We stay the same or round down. 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, we round up. Okay, it doesn't matter what the first digit is, just what sort of next door, what is it telling us to do? All right, I'm always ready to help. Let me know. Give it your best shot. You got this.